In 58 BC, a Roman governor on the verge of political ruin marched into a land torn apart by tribal feuds and a deep suspicion of Rome. This was Gaius Julius Caesar, and this was his first true step toward absolute power. What began as a routine mission to defend Rome's interests became the crucible that transformed him. In the forests, rivers, and burning strongholds of Gaul, Caesar seized unimaginable wealth, unrivaled glory, and the unwavering loyalty of an army that would one day follow him across the Rubicon. Gaul was not merely conquered, it was bled for, and on that blood, Caesar built the foundation of his rise, the campaign that turned a desperate politician into a force, destined to challenge the very republic he served. Welcome to Chronicles and Conquerors, where history's greatest empires and leaders come to life. Subscribe and step into the past to uncover the power, glory, and lessons of history's greatest figures. The Gauls were among Rome's oldest and most relentless enemies. They had once stormed the city of Rome itself, a humiliation that haunted Roman memory for centuries. They had stood beside some of the Republic's deadliest foes, from Pyrrhus of Epirus to Hannibal of Carthage. 4 generations before Caesar, Rome's relationship with Gaul was a mixture of fear, trade, diplomacy, and periodic war. Southern Gaul, later called Provincia. The future Provincia had been conquered decades earlier to secure Rome's land route to Spain. Rome also cultivated alliances with certain Gallic tribes like the Aedui, granting them the rare title of brothers and kinsmen of the Roman people. But this alliance system was fragile. Rival tribes like the Arverni and Sequani resented Rome's influence, and Germanic migrations periodically destabilized the region. Northern Gaul, especially the lands along the Rhine, remained tense, unstable, and fiercely independent. Meanwhile, Rome itself was sick at its core. For decades, the Republic had been shaken by civil conflict. Generals like Marius and Sulla had both marched their armies on Rome, proving that legionaries were now more loyal to their commanders than to the state. Caesar entered politics during this era of instability. He had risen rapidly thanks to brilliant oratory, daring populist reforms, and strategic marriages and alliances. But this also meant he had enemies. Many senators despised him as a dangerous demagogue. Worse, Caesar was drowning in debt, having borrowed enormous sums to fund games, banquets, and political favors. His ambition was limitless, but his pockets were empty. In this turbulent atmosphere, 3 men quietly took control of Roman politics: Pompey the Great, the fabulously wealthy Crassus, and Caesar himself. This informal alliance became known as the First Triumvirate. In 59 BC, Caesar served as consul, Rome's highest office. He pushed through legislation supporting veterans, land reforms, and Pompey's settlement plans. But these victories came at a steep cost. He alienated the conservative faction, the Optimates, who swore to prosecute him the moment he left office. A former consul without an army was vulnerable, and Caesar knew his enemies were waiting. He needed a military command to grant him legal immunity. He needed money to pay his debts, and he needed glory to secure his political future. When provincial commands were assigned, Caesar secured an extraordinary deal. He was granted governorship, not of one province, but 2, Cisalpine Gaul in northern Italy and Illyricum along the Adriatic coast. Later, he also gained command over Transalpine Gaul, the very frontier he was about to set ablaze. This gave him control over an unprecedented 5-year term and, most importantly, an army. Caesar was handed 4 veteran legions. Among the officers who followed him into Gaul, none was more important than his second-in-command, Titus Labienus, a seasoned soldier and politician. Labienus had been a tribune of the plebs and was deeply loyal to Caesar from the earliest days of his career. He would become Caesar's most trusted battlefield commander during the Gallic War. Labienus commanded entire wings of the army, fought independently when needed, and executed Caesar's strategies with near-perfect precision. For the first half of Caesar's rise, Labienus was his right-hand man, as essential to the campaign as his legendary 10th Legion itself. Caesar had his army, his command, and his right-hand man. All he needed was a reason to use them. In 58 BC, that opportunity arrived. A Celtic people known as the Helvetii decided to abandon their homeland in what is now Switzerland and migrate west into Gaul. Their leader, a powerful chieftain named Orgetorix, forged alliances with neighboring tribes, promising a new, more fertile kingdom for them all. According to Caesar's own account, their migrating mass warriors, families, and baggage reached hundreds of thousands. To commit fully to their journey, they burned their own settlements behind them. There would be no going back. But Helvetian politics were as savage as their plan was bold. Orgetorix was accused of seeking kingship and soon died under suspicious circumstances. Leadership passed to a new commander, Vico, who decided to carry on with the migration. To reach their new home, the Helvetii had 2 choices. They could pass through the Roman province and the lands of Rome's allies, the easiest route, or they could take a longer, harsher route through the northern mountain passes controlled by hostile tribes. They chose the easier path. This was exactly the pretext Caesar had been waiting for. Rome had bitter memories of huge migrating tribes after the Cimbrian War, where earlier Germanic wanderers had ravaged Roman armies for years. Caesar had no intention of letting that happen again. He marched with the only legion nearby to Geneva, destroyed a bridge across the Rhine River, and ordered his soldiers to build a fortified barrier stretching for miles along the riverbank. When Helvetian envoys politely asked for safe passage, promising to march peacefully through Roman territory, Caesar stalled for time. He pretended to consider their offer, all while his men worked frantically to finish their defenses. When the war was ready, his answer was simple: no. The Helvetii didn't give up. Groups tried to slip across the river in boats and rafts under the cover of darkness, but Roman javelins and arrows smashed their attempts. The riverbank became a death trap. Blocked in the south, the Helvetii had no choice but to turn back and attempt a difficult northern route through the mountains. Caesar was not finished. Leaving Labienus to hold the region, he hurried to Italy, raised 2 new legions, and recalled his other veteran units from winter quarters. Soon he commanded roughly 33,000 legionaries plus auxiliaries. Labienus did not stop the Helvetii in the mountain passes, almost certainly on Caesar's orders. Once the Helvetii poured into central Gaul and began looting, Caesar could present himself as the protector of Rome's Gallic allies. The intervention would look like rescue, not conquest. Word reached him that the Helvetii were crossing the Arar River, the modern San, in 4 large groups, overloaded with baggage and families. Because of the chaos and sheer size of their column, the crossing had already taken days, and 1 major group still remained on the near bank. Caesar seized the moment. With 3 legions he marched quickly to the river, formed up, and struck without warning. The Helvetian contingent still on the near side was caught mid-crossing, disorganized and burdened. They had no time to form ranks. Many were cut down where they stood. Others fled into the woods, watched helplessly by their companions on the far bank. Then Caesar built a bridge of his own. The crossing that had taken the Helvetii some 20 days, the Romans completed in 1. 6 legions now streamed across, and Caesar pursued his prey deeper into Gaul. The decisive clash came near Bibracte. Caesar's supplies were running low, and he turned toward the wealthy town to resupply. De Vico misread this as a retreat and attacked his rear. Caesar masked the withdrawal with cavalry and light infantry while deploying the bulk of his force on a nearby hill. 4 veteran legions formed 3 lines on the slope. 2 newer legions, thinly spread and supported by auxiliaries, guarded the baggage higher up and made the Roman force look larger than it was. The Helvetii advanced, perhaps 60 to 90,000 warriors, in a dense shield wall. The Romans opened with volleys of heavy javelins that bent on impact and pinned enemy shields. Forced to discard their shields or fight encumbered, the Helvetii line broke into a looser formation. Then the legions charged. The fighting was vicious. Step by step, the Romans pushed the Helvetii back toward a nearby height. Just as the Romans began to press their advantage, another 15,000 warriors, buoyant tooling a Helvetian ally, swept in on the Roman flank, threatening to encircle them. Caesar committed his last line of reserves. The battle dragged on for hours, up and down the slopes, until the Helvetii position finally collapsed. Their allies fell back to a wagon fort made from their baggage, where they fought one last desperate stand before being overwhelmed late into the night. By the end, Caesar may have lost around 5,000 men. The Helvetii lost tens of thousands. Of the hundreds of thousands said to have begun the migration, barely a fraction remained. Those survivors surrendered. Caesar forced them to return to their homeland as client people of Rome, a human buffer between the Republic and the German tribes across the Rhine. He had his first major victory, his first taste of conquest, and a powerful message for both Gaul and Rome. Caesar was a man to be feared. While Caesar rested briefly at Bibracte, another threat emerged. Years earlier, a Germanic king named Ariovistus had crossed the Rhine with his Suevi warriors as mercenaries, aiding the Sequani and Arverni against Rome's allies, the Aedui. His victory made the Aedui tributaries and gave Ariovistus the taste for land in Gaul. He demanded a third of the Sequani territory, then brought over more of his people from across the Rhine. By 58 BC, a massive German presence had taken root in eastern Gaul. Ariovistus took hostages, demanded more land, and ruled by terror. At first, Rome tried diplomacy. The Senate even declared Ariovistus a friend of the Roman people. For Caesar, this was perfect. Gaul under threat, a Roman ally in danger, a foreign king insulting Roman authority. He had every pretext he needed. He marched with 6 legions to the region of Asantio, a key Gallic stronghold. Rumors of German ferocity terrified his troops. Many officers doubted they could beat Ariovistus in open battle. Caesar quelled the panic with a fiery speech, declaring he would march with his beloved 10th Legion alone if the others were too afraid. Shame and pride turned fear into fanatic loyalty. Ariovistus proposed personal meetings, but negotiations went nowhere. The German king mocked Caesar and hinted that powerful men in Rome would cheer his death. It was clear both generals understood that this war was about prestige as much as territory. Eventually, Ariovistus tried a new tactic. He swung his army behind Caesar's position, cutting off Roman supplies. For days he refused to give battle, forcing only skirmishes with his highly flexible cavalry and infantry teams, pairs in which each horseman fought alongside a lightly armed runner. Caesar responded with engineering. He marched his legions past Ariovistus's camp, formed battle lines to protect a labor force, and built a second fortified camp linked to the first. When the Germans tried to prevent this, they were beaten back. Now Caesar had secure positions and access to supply routes. Ariovistus was running out of time. When the Germans finally committed to a pitched battle near the Vosges, they formed a long shield wall with their wagons and families behind them. Caesar arrayed his legions in 3 lines, with his own right wing facing what he saw as the weaker part of the German line. The 2 armies charged simultaneously. The clash was intense and chaotic. On Caesar's right, the Romans slowly pushed the Germans back. On the Roman left, the Germans pressed hard and threatened to break through until the reserve line, led by Publius Crassus, son of the Triumvir, reinforced the flank. The German line buckled, with their shield wall collapsing and their escape clogged by their own baggage. Ariovistus' army broke. Many were cut down trying to flee. Others drowned or were trampled in the route back toward the Rhine. Ariovistus himself barely escaped across the river. His dream of a Germanic kingdom in Gaul died on that field. Caesar had now defeated a massive Celtic migration and crushed a Germanic warlord in a single campaigning season. His name was beginning to echo far beyond Rome. But just when you thought Caesar had Gaul wrapped up, think again. The north was brewing a storm, massive coalition of tribes. The Belgi, hardened by constant war with the Germans, saw Caesar's rapid advance as a direct threat. They were famous for their ferocity, and they weren't about to let Rome just walk all over their lands. Under a king named Galba, they united, ready to throw Caesar out. Caesar's man on the ground, Labienus, sent an urgent message, and Caesar, as usual, moved like lightning. He raised 2 more legions, bringing his total force to about 44,000 men, and raced north. The speed of his response paid off almost immediately. One tribe, the Nervii, decided to switch sides. They surrendered and gave Caesar a treasure trove of intelligence, a full list of the tribes in the Belgic Confederation, how many warriors each had, and the chilling news that a massive army was marching to crush him. Caesar wrote that their army numbered in the hundreds of thousands. Modern historians think it was closer to 80,000, but that was still almost double the size of Caesar's force. The odds were not in his favor. Near the river Axona, Caesar picked his spot. He was a master of terrain. He set up camp on high ground, with the river protecting his rear and marshy land in front. A direct assault would be a meat grinder. He fortified the bridge over the river and stationed troops to guard his supply line. The Belgic army arrived and, instead of attacking Caesar directly, laid siege to a nearby town allied with the Romans. Caesar played it cool. He didn't want to be lured out of his fortress. Instead, he snuck elite missile troops, archers and slingers into the town under the cover of darkness. With the town's defenders now reinforced, the Belgi realized their siege was going nowhere. They turned their attention back to Caesar's army. The 2 massive forces camped a few miles apart, testing each other with cavalry skirmishes. Caesar, always preparing, extended his defenses with trenches and watchtowers to protect his flanks. The Belgian commanders looked at the Roman camp and knew a frontal assault was suicide. So, they decided to get clever. A huge detachment of their warriors went upstream across the river and attacked the Roman guards at the bridge, hoping to cut off Caesar's supplies and trap him. Big mistake. Caesar reacted instantly. Leaving his main legions in their fortified camp, he rushed his cavalry and light infantry to the threatened bridge. As the Belgic warriors struggled to cross the river, they were hammered by a relentless storm of Roman slings, javelins, and arrows. Those who managed to reach the other side were immediately driven back into the water and cut down. The flanking maneuver was a bloody failure. And then, things got even worse for the Belgi. News arrived that Caesar's allies, the Aedui, were attacking the lands of the Bellovaci, one of the most powerful tribes in the Belgic Confederation. Now the Belgic army was trapped. They faced an unbreakable Roman wall in front of them and total devastation of their homes behind them. The Confederation fell apart. The alliance shattered as each tribe scrambled to go home and defend their own lands. They promised to reassemble if Caesar attacked any one of them, but the unity was broken. Caesar wasn't going to let them just walk away. He unleashed his cavalry and mobile units under Labienus to hunt them down. The Belgic retreat turned into a chaotic rout. Without coordination, they were picked off one by one. The casualties were horrific. One by one, the Belgic tribes surrendered. But not all of them. Deeper in the wild north, the fiercest of them all, the Nervii, were preparing for one last, desperate stand. And they were setting a trap. The king of the Nervii, Boduognadus, was a brilliant and brutal strategist. He knew Caesar's habits, knew that the Romans always set up a fortified camp before a battle. So, along the river Sabis, he gathered around 50,000 warriors and waited. They hid themselves in the forests on the far side of the shallow river. even creating living fences out of hedges and branches to break up the Roman legions when they crossed. It was the perfect ambush. Caesar's army marched forward, completely unaware of the danger. He had his usual formation, 6 veteran legions leading the way, followed by a long baggage train and his 2 newest legions guarding the rear. When the first wave of legions reached a hill overlooking the river, they began the routine work of building their camp. Caesar sent his cavalry and light infantry across the river to scout ahead. Nervian horsemen engaged the Roman scouts, then staged a fake retreat. That was a signal. From the woods, tens of thousands of Nervii warriors erupted with a terrifying roar. They charged across the shallow river and slammed into the Roman legions before they could even form proper battle lines. The Roman cavalry, caught completely by surprise, broke and fled, crashing straight into their own infantry. It was absolute chaos. Legionaries were grabbing their shields, trying to find their standards, and forming up wherever they could. The battlefield was a confusing mess of half-built camp fortifications and the clever hedges the Nervii had planted. The Roman army was split, fighting 3 separate, desperate battles at once. On one side, the famous 10th and 9th legions were holding their own against a tribe called the Indebted. In the center, the 11th and 8th were locked in a brutal struggle with the Vermondui, but on the right flank, it was a catastrophe. The 7th and 12th legions were taking the full, savage force of the main Nervii charge. They were being overwhelmed. The standard of the 12th legion was captured, a terrible disgrace. Centurions were falling left and right. The lines were beginning to crumble. Seeing the right wing collapse, the auxiliary troops and the rest of the Roman cavalry fled the field, convinced the battle was lost. Any other commander might have given up, but not Caesar. He grabbed a shield from a common soldier and charged into the front line of the disintegrating 12th legion. His personal appearance, his sheer force of will rallied the terrified men. He ordered the 7th and 12th to link up, form a dense defensive square and hold their ground no matter what. Across the battlefield, Labienus, commanding the successful left wing, saw the crisis and detached the victorious 10th Legion and sent them racing across the field to reinforce a shattered right. At that exact moment, the 2 fresh legions that had been guarding the baggage train finally arrived on the scene. They smashed into the flank of the Nervii, who were now caught in a closing trap. Pinned on all sides, the Nervii fought with a courage that stunned even the Romans. They refused to surrender, fighting to the last man. Caesar later wrote that out of a nation of warriors, only a few hundred survived. Roman losses were heavy, but the army was saved. Without Caesar's personal courage and brilliant command, the Battle of the Sabis would have been one of Rome's greatest disasters. Instead, it became a legend, with the Belgic tribes broken, the Helvetii crushed, and the Germans driven back across the Rhine. Caesar was now the effective master of Gaul, but the war wasn't over. By 56 BC, things seemed quiet on the surface. But resentment was simmering in one tribe. A wealthy, seafaring people called the Venati were about to challenge Rome's newfound dominance in a way Caesar had never experienced before. They had made peace with Caesar the previous year, then broken their word, seizing Roman envoys. Confident in their powerful Atlantic fleet and strong hilltop ports, they believed they could dictate terms. Caesar chose war. His first attempts to besiege their coastal strongholds were frustrating. The Venati simply evacuated by sea, relocating civilians and supplies from port to port. The Romans, lacking a proper fleet for the rough Atlantic waters, could not bring them to decisive battle. So Caesar built a navy. Roman shipwrights and allied craftsmen constructed a fleet adapted using local techniques, sturdier timbers. Flatter Hulzan sailed out under the command of Decimus Junius Brutus. Even then, Roman rams and boarding tactics struggled against the Venati's heavy, high-sided ships with thick hulls and high decks. Brutus adopted a new method. Roman sailors used long poles with hooks to seize the rigging and cut away the Venati sails. Once a ship was crippled and adrift, Roman marines could board at leisure. Ship by ship, the Venati fleet was torn to pieces. Their naval power shattered, their coastal towns fell. The punishment that followed was harsh, an unmistakable warning to the rest of Gaul. Soon after, new Germanic groups, the Usipetes and Tentari, crossed the Rhine in massive numbers, fleeing the pressure of the Suebi and pouring into Gaul. They destroyed the Menapi, seized their ships, and began raiding. Caesar feared that discontented Gauls would join them. He called a council of Gallic chiefs, extracted cavalry as both allies and hostages, and marched with 5 legions to confront the newcomers. At first, the Germans tried to stall with negotiations, insisting they only sought land and would be Rome's loyal allies if granted it. Caesar believed they were buying time for their cavalry to raid ahead and gather resources. His suspicions were confirmed when German horsemen attacked his own cavalry despite a truce, killing men including members of a prominent Roman family. Caesar decided the negotiations were over. He detained the German envoys, formed his legions into combat formation, and marched straight on their camp. The attack was sudden and devastating. The German warriors, caught off guard, broke, many were cut down. Others tried to swim the river and drowned. Only fragments of the migrating tribes escaped back across the Rhine. Critics in Rome later accused Caesar of treachery, imprisoning diplomats and attacking without formal declaration. Caesar, however, was already thinking about how to turn the controversy into spectacle. If Germans could cross into Gaul, he would show that Romans could go the other way. In a feat of engineering and propaganda, Caesar had his legions build a bridge over the Rhine. Massive timbers were driven into the riverbed. The superstructure was completed in just 10 days. Roman troops crossed into Germania, burned some villages and crops to demonstrate their reach, then withdrew after less than 3 weeks and dismantled the bridge. Strategically, the campaign achieved little. Symbolically, it was electric. Caesar had led an army into the mysterious forests beyond the Rhine and returned untouched. Naturally, his eyes turned next to another edge of the known world, Britain. From Gaul, merchants whispered stories of a mist-covered island beyond the ocean rich in resources, home to strange chariots and painted warriors. Some British tribes had sent aid to Caesar's Gallic enemies. That was excuse enough. In 55 BC, Caesar assembled warships and transports, embarked with the 7th and 10th legions, and crossed the narrow sea from the region of modern Calais. The Britons were waiting, massed along the cliffs near Dover. They lined the shore with chariots, cavalry, and infantry. The approach was too dangerous. Caesar sailed along the coast until he found a flatter beach spot. The Britons followed along the cliffs, shadowing his fleet. When the Roman transports finally anchored, their deep hulls still sat in waist-deep water. Legionaries had to jump overboard, overloaded with armor and weapons, and wade toward a shore bristling with javelins and spears. British warriors charged, riding chariots and horses into the shallows, hurling missiles at men who could barely keep their footing. Roman formations broke up in the surf. The landing faltered. From his warships on the flanks, Caesar moved lighter vessels closer to shore, unleashing volleys of arrow swarms and artillery into the Britons' exposed sides. Even so, many legionaries hesitated to leap into the killing water then. According to tradition, the eagle-bearer of the 10th Legion shouted that he would not allow the standard to fall into enemy hands and leaped into the waves, wading forward alone. His courage shamed others into action. Cohort by cohort, Romans plunged into the water and fought their way ashore. Once they gained dry ground and could lock shields, the tide turned. The Britons withdrew inland, intact but forced to abandon the beach. With no cavalry, his horse transports scattered by storms, Caesar could not pursue. He dug a camp near the shore. British chiefs sent envoys and hostages, testing this new invader as much as submitting to him. Then the sea struck. A violent storm damaged many of Caesar's ships. His men, suddenly trapped on a hostile island with no sure way home, fell into despair. Caesar had the fleet dragged onto the shore and enclosed within a fortification linked to the main camp. Foraging parties went out under guard, one of which was ambushed and mauled by British chariot forces. The Britons, emboldened, assembled for a full attack on the Roman camp. This time, the legions faced them on open, solid ground. In disciplined formation, the Roman infantry blunted the chariot chargers and drove back the British line. Lacking heavy infantry of their own, the Britons could not stand in a drawn-out close-quarters battle. Once again they sued for peace. With winter nearing and his fleet in need of repair, Caesar accepted. He re-embarked his men and returned to Gaul. Militarily, little had changed. Politically, he had done what no Roman general had ever done: led a campaign on Britain's shores. The following year, 54 BC, he returned with a larger force, 5 legions and 2,000 cavalry on better ships. The landing went unopposed. British tribes had assumed a show of force, not full invasion. Caesar pushed inland, facing a united coalition under a leader named Cassivellaunus, who abandoned massed infantry battles and fought a war of ambushes and chariot raids. Roman columns were harried constantly along forest tracks and river crossings. At one point, Cassivellaunus dismissed much of his infantry and relied on a compact force of chariots to strike and vanish, maximizing mobility and minimizing supply needs. Yet, British unity frayed. Rival tribes, especially the powerful Trinobons, turned on Cassivellaunus and defected to Caesar, providing hostages, grain, and intelligence, including the location of Cassivellaunus' stronghold. Caesar advanced, burned fields and villages, and besieged the hill fort. Cassivellaunus tried to distract him by ordering allied kings in Kent to attack the Roman beachhead, but the fortified camp held with no realistic hope of crushing the legions and facing betrayal at home. Cassivellaunus sued for peace. Caesar took hostages and tribute, then sailed back to Gaul before winter. He had not conquered Britain, he had not annexed its lands, but he had tested its strength, learned its terrain, and once again dazzled the Roman public with stories of monsters, painted warriors, and victories at the edge of the world. However, back in Gaul, the ground was shifting. With Caesar spending years campaigning far afield, resentment smoldered. Heavy tribute, requisitions, and the constant presence of legions bred hatred. In 54 BC, the Eburones, led by Ambriorix, rose in revolt in what is now Belgium. They attacked a Roman winter camp housing a detached force of 7,000 to 9,000 men. Through trickery and promises of safe passage, they lured the Romans into abandoning their fortified position, then ambushed and annihilated them. It was one of Rome's worst disasters in Gaul. Ambiorix then besieged another Roman garrison while the Treveri and other tribes joined the uprising. Supported by German warriors across the Rhine, Caesar's legions were spread out in winter quarters, vulnerable and isolated. Caesar reacted with cold speed. He raced to relieve the besieged garrison, forced Ambiorix to lift the siege, and defeated other rebel forces in rapid succession. His revenge on the Eburones was devastating. Their lands were ravaged, their people hunted, their tribal name nearly extinguished. To stabilize the province, Caesar brought in additional legions, some sent by Pompey, raising his total force in Gaul to around 50,000 men. Even so, the greatest challenge was still to come. In 52 BC, while Caesar was briefly in Italy dealing with political tensions, a new revolt ignited across central Gaul. Its leader was an Arvernian noble, Vercingetorix. Young, charismatic, ruthless, and politically astute, he grasped both Roman strengths and Roman weaknesses. He united many tribes under a single plan: deny Caesar supplies, burn anything of value, and force the Romans to starve. The rebellion spread like wildfire. Roman outposts fell. Allies wavered. Caesar responded with one of his trademark forced marches, crossing snowbound terrain to re-enter Gaul unexpectedly. He struck quickly at wavering tribes, captured important towns, and moved against the Bituriges' capital of Avaricum, one of the richest cities in the region. Vercingetorix advised the Bituriges to burn their own city rather than let it become a Roman fortress. They refused. Avaricum was too beloved, too prosperous, so Caesar besieged it. Despite its strong natural defenses and Vercingetorix's attempts to harass Roman supply lines, the city fell in less than a month. Caesar's troops slaughtered tens of thousands of inhabitants. Only a tiny fraction escaped. The legions feasted on the captured food and supplies. Vercingetorix had learned a hard lesson. He could not save every ally, and he could not meet Caesar's legions in open battle and win. Next, Caesar marched toward Gergovia, the capital of the Arverni and Vercingetorix's home base. Perched atop a high plateau and surrounded by hills, Gergovia was a fortress in itself. Vercingetorix moved quickly, occupying commanding ground and fortifying his position. Caesar attempted to repeat familiar tactics, cutting off enemy supplies while keeping his own routes open. He seized a nearby hill that dominated a key route into the city and linked it to his main camp with trenches. But Vercingetorix struck back with politics. He bribed Caesar's old ally Ziagui, convincing their elites to switch sides. Suddenly, Caesar's supply line and his one reliable Gallic partner were threatened. Revolt spread behind him. He left part of his force to hold positions near Gergovia and marched off with 4 legions to punish the Aedui, defeating them and forcing them to send cavalry back to his side. Even so, Caesar could feel the strategic noose tightening. He needed a blow powerful enough to allow a safe withdrawal. Spotting that Vercingetorix had divided his forces between the main camp and outlying positions, Caesar attempted a bold surprise attack. He sent a diversionary force toward the hills to draw Vercingetorix away, while the bulk of his legions stormed the Gallic camp below Gergovia's walls. At first, the plan worked brilliantly. Romans overran the Gallic camp and pushed their enemies right up against the city itself. Then the situation spiraled out of control. Only one legion heard Caesar's order to halt and withdraw. The others, intoxicated by success, pressed on toward the city walls. They clambered up, some even reaching the ramparts before being hurled back. Missiles rained down from above. Vercingetorix brought reinforcements crashing into their flank. Roman formations disintegrated. Centurions died in droves trying to maintain order. Auxiliaries and allies appeared on the horizon, causing panic as Roman soldiers mistook them for fresh enemy reinforcements. Caesar threw in the 10th Legion and every reserve he had to cover the retreat and prevent total annihilation. Eventually, blooded and shaken, the Roman army extricated itself. From the slopes beneath Gergovia, Caesar downplayed the losses in his writings, but modern estimates suggest thousands of Romans were killed. It was one of his few clear defeats. Vercingetorix had proved he could outthink and outfight Caesar under the right circumstances. But the war was not over. While Caesar struggled at Gergovia, Labienus was fighting in northern Gaul, facing forces under a leader named Camulaginus near the town of Lutetia. With scorched earth tactics and swampy terrain, the Gauls tried to pin down the Romans and inspire further revolts, but Labienus maneuvered skillfully, using divided forces to lure the Gauls into battle and then reinforcing at the critical moment. Camulaginus was killed, and the northern rebellion stalled. Eventually, Caesar and Labienus reunited their legions near Agedincum, yet Gaul was now a cauldron. More tribes joined Vercingetorix, and even Roman provincial territory in southern Gaul was attacked. Vercingetorix attempted to replicate his success at Gergovia, refuse open battle, scorch the land, and starve the invaders. But a clash near the river Vingine did not go his way. Whether shaken by this or calculating that he should avoid more open engagements, he withdrew to a stronghold, the hilltop town of Alesia, capital of the Mandubi. There he gathered around 80,000 warriors, plus the civilian population, and sent his cavalry out at night to call all Gaul to his aid. On paper, this was a formidable position. A large army defending a fortified town on high ground, allies across Gaul ready to send relief forces, an enemy still outnumbering Caesar. But Caesar saw something else, an opportunity to trap Gaul's greatest army in one place and destroy it. He ordered his legions to do what they did better than any in the world: build. First, the Romans constructed a continuous line of fortifications, a circumvallation about 16 kilometers long, encircling Alesia, then used ditches, palisades, towers, and traps to turn the hillside into a ring of iron. When Vercingetorix's cavalry tried to break out and disrupt the building work, German horsemen in Caesar's service helped drive them back. Realizing that once the Roman ring closed, he would be sealed in, Vercingetorix sent his mounted warriors out one last time under cover of darkness to summon every ally they could. Caesar discovered this through deserters. He understood at once. Soon there would be not one Gallic army to deal with, but two. One inside the town, one outside. So he built another line of fortifications. This second ring, 21 kilometers long, faced outward, with towers, ditches, and traps designed to protect the Romans from any relief force. Between the two walls, the Romans created a killing ground held by their own camps, reserves, and artillery. Then they stripped the countryside for 30 days' worth of grain. If any army was going to starve, it would not be Caesar's. Inside Alesia, the situation turned grim. So many mouths to feed, and no way to break out. In a desperate attempt to conserve supplies, Vercingetorix expelled those who would not fight. Women, children, the old and sickened, tried to send them out through the Roman lines. Caesar refused to let them pass. The civilians were trapped between city and siege works, begging food and water from both sides, and getting nothing. Over days, many died where they lay. It was a brutal demonstration of total war and a ruthless message. Caesar would not be swayed by pity. At last, the Gallic relief force arrived. Ancient figures vary wildly, but even conservative estimates suggest tens of thousands, perhaps 70 to 100,000 warriors. Whatever the exact number, they greatly outnumbered Caesar's legions and auxiliaries. On the first day, the relief army tested the Roman outer wall, filling in ditches and sending light troops and cavalry across. From inside Alesia, Vercingetorix massed his men to attack the inner defenses whenever he saw a chance. The Germans in Roman service again proved decisive, outflanking the Gallic cavalry and driving them back. Vercingetorix held back from a full sally. The next assault came at night. The relief army launched a surprise attack on a section of the Roman line, achieving some success before being contained. Marcus Antonius, also known as Mark Antony, commanded that sector and shifting troops from quieter sections to stiffen the defense, earning praise for his strategic maneuvering. Once more, Vercingetorix attempted to support the outer attack, but the Roman system of ditches slowed him down. By the time his men reached the inner palisades, the opportunity had passed. Realizing that piecemeal assaults were failing, the Gallic commanders performed a better reconnaissance of the Roman works and found a weakness: a steep hill along the northern sector where the Roman defenses, though still formidable, were more awkward to manfully. They devised their final, grand effort. The relief army launched a massive, coordinated attack along the entire outer ring, concentrating the best warriors under Vercingetorix, a cousin of Vercingetorix, against the northern hill. At the same time, Vercingetorix hurled his entire force against the inner line, striking wherever he saw signs of strain. The Romans were now under attack from both sides along a front of many miles. On the northern hill, Gallic warriors filled in ditches, dragged fascians and earth to create ramps, and brought up ladders and hooks to tear down the palisades. Fighting surged back and forth across the fortification. Some parts of the Roman wall were nearly overwhelmed. Caesar raced from sector to sector, shifting reserves, rallying shaken units, personally leading reinforcements where the danger was greatest. Trumpets blared, dust and screams filled the air. Between the inner and outer fortifications, there was nowhere to retreat, nowhere to regroup. If the line broke, the Roman army could be crushed in the space between. At the northern hill, the situation reached a breaking point. Part of the Roman line sagged under the weight of the assault. Gallic warriors forced their way onto the ramparts, victory seemed within their grasp. Then Caesar played his last card, leading his German cavalry and the last of his reserves. He emerged on the flank and rear of the attacking Gauls. The charge hit like a hammer. Already locked in brutal combat at the walls, the Gallic warriors suddenly found themselves attacked from behind. Panic spread. Those at the breach were cut down. Seeing their strongest assault repulsed, the rest of the relief army faltered. The great mass of warriors began to break and run. The rout swept back across the plain. Cavalry chased them down, turning retreat into slaughter. Inside, Alesia Vercingetorix saw the disaster unfold. His attempt to smash the inner Roman line also failed as Caesar redirected troops freed from the outer crisis. The siege was effectively over. With no hope of relief and food dwindling, Vercingetorix surrendered. Ancient tradition has him riding out in full armor, circling Caesar, and laying his weapons at the Romans' feet. The Gallic cause died with that gesture. The relief army was scattered. The defenders in Alesia were killed or enslaved. Vercazivelis and Vercingetorix were taken alive. Legionary dead may have numbered in the thousands, but Caesar's army had survived and won one of the most extraordinary victories in Roman history. The war did not end overnight. Pockets of resistance continued in Bicereges, Carnets, Bellovaci, Aedebates, Andicave, and others. Caesar launched winter campaigns, surprising tribes who thought snow and cold would protect them. Bicereges were cowed, Carnets were crushed. In the north, Bellovaci and Commius waged guerrilla war until their leaders were killed or driven into exile. Final holdouts at Uxellodema were starved out and punished severely. By 51 BC, organized Gallic resistance was broken. Gaul was pacified, at least, by Roman standards. Caesar's legions had carved out a new Roman world from the Atlantic to the Rhine. Hundreds of thousands were dead, enslaved, or uprooted. Tribal elites were replaced by Roman clients. Roads, colonies, and garrisons followed. And Caesar himself, he now commanded a battle-hardened army fiercely loyal to him alone, enjoyed unimaginable wealth from plunder and tribute, and possessed a reputation that outshone nearly every other Roman alive. But the republic he served was fragile. His old ally Pompey was now his rival. Senators in Rome feared what a man like Caesar might do with such an army at his back. The Rhine and the Channel were no longer his horizons. The next battlefield would be Rome itself. This concludes our first chapter on Gaius Julius Caesar, his rise through the fires of the Gallic Wars. But his story is far from over. He will return as conqueror and warlord in the next part of this saga. Thank you for watching Chronicles and Conquerors. If you enjoyed this journey of Julius Caesar campaign in Gaul, make sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story of history's greatest empires, rulers, and battles. Join us again as we bring the past to life one story at a time.